Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Last month, the naval force of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps conducted a military exercise off and on the coast of Abu Musa, one of three disputed islands strategically situated in the Straits of Hormuz. Iran unilaterally took possession of them some 50 years ago, but they are also claimed by the United Arab Emirates. In order to reassure the Emirates, as well as other Gulf countries, of American support against Iran's aggression, CENTCOM Commander General Eric Kurilla and NAVCENT Commander Vice Admiral Brad Cooper transited the Straits of Hormuz on board a guided missile destroyer, inspecting the potential naval front and visiting friendly capitals along the Gulf. Is Iran spoiling for a fight, and what might happen should it get its wish? To help us figure it out, we're joined all the way from Washington, D.C. by retired Brigadier General Mark Emmett, who's a former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. Thank you for joining us, General.
Sure.
Also joining us from elsewhere in Washington, D.C. is retired Colonel Joel Rayburn, a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary and Special Envoy for Syria. Thank you for joining us as well, Colonel.
My pleasure.
And with me here in the studio is our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, give us a broader understanding of the complexities facing the United States, particularly in the Gulf, as well as the recent deployments that have been made in order to, once again, deter Iran, according to American statements.
So first of all, if we do see a conflagration there in the Gulf, it wouldn't be the first time. We had Operation Ernst Will in the 1980s when the Iranians tried to interfere with shipping there, and the U.S. reflagged tankers and then had to come to the assistance of friendly countries. But what we see right now, if we go along with your description of the General Kurilla and Admiral Cooper and what they had done in early August, maybe a disconnect between the political fortunes of the Islamic Republic and the military planning, whether it is contingency planning or real war plans of the IRGC, or perhaps some disconnect between the naval elements of the IRGC and the other ones. Because only a few days ago, Iran, along with other countries, was invited to join BRICS, the meeting of five countries, quite a prestigious one. All of a sudden, Iran, which was a pariah, is invited to sit with the big or at least medium boys. And at the same time, what you described, the IRGC is raising tensions with the Emiratis. The Bahrainis are quite afraid, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, and it is quite right for the United States not only to show the flag, but to seriously consider the possibility that it will have to come to the assistance of its friends and allies if deterrence does not help.
Before we dive into specifics, I'd like to start with a more holistic question, and that is, I just had a conversation earlier today with a two-star general here in the region, and I asked him one specific. Is the current tension between the Islamic Republic of Iran, its efforts to escalate somewhat the level in which it is provoking not only the United States, but also partner forces in the region, as part of basically strategic power competition with the Chinese, considering the fact that the Iranians have been bailed out by the Chinese, $400 billion contract over the course of 25 years, granting the Chinese access to much of Iranian infrastructure. Is this now something that we're to expect more into the various postures and decision-making taking place vis-a-vis the Middle East? General Kimmett, we'll start with you.
Well, if you're referring to China, I think it's important to note that they also just recently came to an agreement on a series of nuclear activities as well with Saudi Arabia. The Chinese clearly are not only insinuating themselves, but I'd say they're infiltrating into the Middle East in a way they've done in Africa. They are making no bones about their intentions. They say they're diplomatic, but I think everybody knows that they're somewhat avarice. They have to feed this great maw called the population of China and continue to produce. And they see Africa and now the Middle East as a great source of material and, to a great extent, a great source of markets. So I think we're going to see more and more Chinese influence in the region. And I would suspect the region will make the same mistakes in many cases that have happened in Africa as African countries have gone into debt traps as a result of Chinese involvement. So whether it's Iran, whether it's Saudi Arabia or elsewhere, it is concerning that the Chinese are giving a lifeline to Iran to continue to bust sanctions. But I think we're going to see more of that rather than less of that out of China.
Colonel Rayburn, your take on this?
Well, I think most of the time, in my experience, the military moves that you see the Iranian regime and its proxies make on the ground are aligned with and are part of a broader Iranian regime geopolitical strategy, whatever that happens to be. So they move their pawns and their pieces on a geopolitical chessboard, and it's sort of and it's aligned. And the supreme leader, it aligns in the supreme leader's own foreign policy and strategy and those around him. On our side, we almost always make military moves for their own sake and for operational reasons or discrete reasons that are very often disconnected from the geopolitical picture. So we have a situation like that, I think, right now. CENTCOM has sent reinforcements to the region. You remember the impetus for this was the Iranian seizure of oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, Gulf of Oman, and so on, the Gulf region. And so the CENTCOM's forces have been deployed there. The naval forces that transited the strait are there to deter the IRGC Navy from taking steps like that against commercial shipping. But the whole thing, Mark's right. China is in this, and I think that the kind of steps that you're seeing the Iranian regime take right now, it's doing under the umbrella of the diplomatic deal that the Chinese brokered. In other words, that they've been able to sort of strategically neutralize Saudi Arabia out of or create some concerns with Saudi Arabia in this geopolitical picture. And there are other areas of escalation beyond the Iran-Saudi Arabia traditional confrontation that are happening right now, but we can touch on those in a minute. I think
absolutely.
Mark has something to say.
Yeah, General Kimmett, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time really understanding what's up with China, with Iran right now. It seems in many ways that their strategy is incoherent. On one hand, they're joining the BRICS and trying to demonstrate that they could be part of a peaceful international structure. And at the same time, they're overtly trying to provoke the United States into an incident inside the Gulf. The only way I can make any sense out of this is by understanding that the BRICS is really a reaction to the G7, a reaction to the G20. It's almost its own non-aligned movement. And if you think by Iran joining the BRICS, they are getting more license and more backing for them to be more provocative towards the United States, I think that's the only way I can put this together. And if that's correct, they're joining the BRICS. Unfortunately, I think will make them even more provocative and more scrapping for an incident with the United States as they believe they have the backing of their BRICS brothers in the process.
This is a very good point indeed. We can elaborate briefly on the BRICS, since I think that it should have an entire panel for itself. But when we're looking at the joining into this BRICS, which includes, of course, Brazil, India, China, Russia, and South Africa, we see that Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other countries
Egypt,
also, indeed, Egypt, Argentina, for that matter, they're all joining BRICS, but there is a lot of contradiction there between Tehran's policies and the Ayatollah regime's practice in the field. And at the same time, as Colonel Rayburn noted correctly, the Americans are currently, under the leadership of the Biden administration, seeking a reactionary approach where there is a threat and they try to maintain freedom of maritime shipping in the Straits and to reassure, of course, their partners in the region. But there is no clear strategy to contend. And we know what Chinese philosophers, war philosophers, have said about the absence of having a strategy without tactics or tactics without its strategy.
So let me join General Kimmett in wondering, in not understanding what the Iranians are up to. And while we are looking and we are now trying to analyze diplomacy, operations, weapons, to my mind, the key question is command and control. What do the Iranian regime, the close circle around Khamenei, what is the decision-making there? What is the strategic goal? What are they trying to achieve? And if they do have some policy, coherent or otherwise, is it trickling down to the field? Because unless we know the answer to that, we won't be able to decipher what's happening.
Indeed. Colonel Rayburn?
On the question of whether Iranian operational commanders are freelancing or whether they're following some kind of centralized strategy or plan or left and right limits, I think it's very rare that Iranian commanders freelance. Now, it also may be rare that the Supreme Leader gives explicit tactical instructions, but I think it's true that the Supreme Leader establishes parameters for operational activities and doesn't then intervene and except by exception. So I assume that the things that we're seeing the Iranians do operationally are that the Supreme Leader's cognizant of them, that it's part of some broader guidance that he's given. He's pretty good at that over the years. So I think what you're seeing, I mentioned before, there are several other areas of escalation. There has been an area of escalation that's been de-escalated between the Iranians and the Saudis since the Chinese brokered their normalization agreement. To my mind, what I thought that was at the time was just the Iranian regime managing to use the Chinese to neutralize the Saudis strategically, while the Iranians would continue to confront Israeli interests, U.S. interests, and other interests beyond those of the Saudis. I think that's what's playing out right now. You can see the Iranian response to the deployment of more U.S. forces in the Gulf region has been to gin up this crazy rumor, which they're pushing with all of their media outlets, that the Americans are going to intervene somehow and physically seize the Iraq-Syria border and touch off some kind of big conflict, some ground conflict with the Iranian-backed militias and the Iranian regime itself, and maybe the Syrian regime out on that frontier. There's nothing behind this at all. The Iranians have to know that. So this is a propaganda thing, and it may be that they're looking for some sort of pretext, as Mark mentioned, to provoke some sort of incident with the United States for broader purposes. On top of that, the rare Israeli Air Force attack against Aleppo airport that shut down Aleppo airport for a couple of days, which we're told was based on the transit of sensitive weapons, Iranian weapons. I think that indicates that the Iranians are still trying to escalate on that front as well. And so these are things that are happening. It's almost as though by de-escalating on the Yemen front, that the Iranians have been able to focus on escalating here without any kind of having to worry about any kind of backlash from the Saudis.
Of course, with regard to the northern front of Syria, that's part of the game on a broader sense, since Syria is also part of that same AOR, area of responsibility for CENTCOM, and the various challenges posed to U.S. posture in the region have to do also with Syria as well as Iraq and elsewhere. But I'd like to ask you, General Kimmett, when we're looking at the multiple challenges at hand, there was the deployment, of course, of the USS Bataan and the USS Carter into the Straits, and we saw roughly 3,000 Marines alongside sailors, of course, operating the vessels in the region, potentially also deployed on commercial shipping. There's not been yet any official confirmation thereof, but this is not something new. The United States has done so in the past and has been very vigilant in ensuring freedom of maritime shipping for the greater good, not only for the region. So how do you see this complexity develop with everything attached to it, of course, at a time when the Iranians may or may not be in a position to try and prove their strategic partnership with Russia more in the level that they would like to reach at this point?
Yeah, and I think this demonstrates the virtue of the Unified Command Plan for the United States military. The fact that the CENTCOM commander focuses on this daily and exclusively. He's not worried about Ukraine. He's not worried about Taiwan. He's not worried about the South China Sea. So I'm pretty confident that they've got a lot of smart people down at CENTCOM, even though CENTCOM is evacuating today because they have a hurricane on the way. There's no doubt the procedure of bringing the CENTCOM headquarters now over to Qatar is in place. And again, this is something I thought it was brilliant the way that Kurilla and Cooper did a leadership tour of the AOR to assure everyone that they're not going to be provoked and the United States is there to help. So I feel pretty comfortable about all this. It's not, while it may seem complex with the panoply of issues going on around the world, this is just day-to-day business for CENTCOM, and they've been doing it for 40 years.
Colonel Rayburn, would you like to add?
As a fellow CENTCOM officer, I also would wax poetic about CENTCOM's capabilities. But General Kim is absolutely right. CENTCOM, I think right now, General Kurilla and his command are making all the right moves. Reinforcing in the Gulf the way they've done, this is going to deter Iranian threats to shipping, which we're escalating. I think he moved F-35s into the Iraq-Syria theater in response to the Russian shenanigans with our MQ-9 drones and other aircraft. And we're told it's reported that kind of Russian provocation has dropped off. They don't want to mess with F-35s. So I have General Kurilla and his command, as I say, they're making all the right moves right now. What you're also seeing, General Milley and CENTCOM before him indicated that they're going to help the Jordanians to tighten up on the Syria-Jordan border for this narco trafficking and smuggling threat that's coming across. So these are areas of escalation, but I do think CENTCOM is postured and has a good plan. They're on it, and they're responding in all the right ways. There are more areas. We'll have to see what they're going to do about this phantom Iraq-Syria escalation that I think probably at the Iranian regime's behest, the Iraqi militias and their allied political parties are trying to gin up in Iraq for some reason. It's hard for me to see where that is the purpose of that and how that's going to play out. But it definitely is something that CENTCOM's going to have to watch.
The General Kimmett? Yeah,
I would just mention on that latter point. Obviously, the resistance groups inside of Iraq are trying to make big hay out of the issue that they have doubled the forces inside. We have doubled the forces inside of Iraq recently. But I think that U.S. Embassy and CENTCOM have made it very, very clear that this is just part of a normal overlap with regards to a typical transition between forces. And in a couple of months, the numbers will be down to where they were. That's not going to stop the resistance groups from trying to suggest that the Americans are about to invade. But I think cooler heads have prevailed, got the message out to the Iraqi people, and that seems to have died down as an issue.
Colonel Rayburn?
Yeah, I think it also, because, Prime Minister Soudani and his delegation came over to Washington. They came away with, I think, a very a well-timed, very, very well thought out security agreement with the United States on defense matters, including the future posture of the counter-ISIS force and so on. And almost immediately came these rumors, this propaganda campaign from the Iranian-backed militias. It's as though I think probably that was a political move and an operational move designed to try to undermine the joint security agreement that Prime Minister Soudani just struck, to undermine his standing and so on, and to cast that agreement as something nefarious that was going to be against Iraqi interests, certainly against the Iraqi militia interests.
Indeed. Of course, it's safe to say that the PMF, or the Popular Mobilization Forces, Hashd-e-Shabi in Arabic, are an Iranian agent. And the various 44 alliances out of 44 militias within the alliance, out of that, more than 70% are affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, is quite substantive. On the same note, the agreement that Colonel Rayburn mentioned between Iraq and the United States, there was also a very important note that the Pentagon highlighted, and that is the Iraqi deployment is still within the context of an advisory capacity as opposed to Operation Inherent Resolve in Syria, which is an operational one.
But this is probably in order to appease domestic public opinion for fears of deeper involvement. And we all seem to be in basic agreement, which is good, but also a problem. And one is reminded of the colonial era and white man's burden. The intelligence equivalent would be that we are looking at it from a rational Western point of view, while the Iranians might be operating under another perspective altogether, of tricks, of deception, denial, and they may believe that Washington might be hatching a new secret plan. They are always mindful of the fact that Qassam Soleimani was killed on the second day of election year 2020. And here we are approaching the election year of 2024. Granted, it's Biden, not Trump, and Biden is supposedly moderate, peaceful, diplomacy-driven. But who knows? Maybe he would want to show his macho face and start something. Now, we know that this is not true, but they may operate according to the erroneous impression that it is true. Now, whether that would deter them or provoke them remains to be seen.
Well, nobody will be missing Ismail Qaani. That's something I can tell you for sure. But we're drawing near to the end of the program, and I'd like to give both of you the opportunity to provide certain perspective, also within context of the fact, did the latest deployments of U.S. forces in the region, the thickening of forces, and also the various efforts by CENTCOM to reassure partners in the region, actually reassured partners in the region, including Gulf Arab states, as well as Israel, as well as Iraq and others. Is the United States on the right track?
Yeah, in my view, the U.S. is on the right track. Not only do they have to reassure our partners and our allies, but I think they have to counter the propaganda that's coming from the Iranian-backed militias and the Iranian themselves. So it's not simply enough to assure our friends and our allies, which we are doing, but we've got to have as equally strong a counter-propaganda mission to ensure that even though the leadership may see us as helpful, we've also got to make sure the population in the region does not see those assurance operations, as Emil said, as conspiratorial plots to overtake the region.
Indeed. Colonel Rayburn?
Militarily, as I mentioned, CENTCOM, I think, is making all the right moves. However, above them, there is a broader national security strategy, regional strategy in the Biden administration that remains wedded to deal-making with the Iranian regime. And I think that cancels out what healthy steps the U.S. military would be able to take in the region. Is canceled out by the broader geopolitical posture that the administration has. which is the unfreezing of funds, the relief of pressure on the Iranian regime at a time when the Iranian regime is still provoking, still escalating against U.S. allies in the region. This has always been the harmful mixed message dating back to, I mean, certainly the Obama administration, really often before that. And it will hamstring, it will constrain the effectiveness of U.S. relations in the region as long as it goes on. I mean, yeah, okay, CENTCOM is taking exactly the right step in the Gulf region. However, they're doing it at the same time that the United States has unfrozen $16 billion or more, is in the process of unfreezing $16 billion or more, and is tacitly giving sanctions relief to the Iranian regime such that they're able to export over 2 million barrels a day now. So I think the region will say, yeah, that's a good mitigating measure that CENTCOM and NAVCENT and AFCENT are doing what they're doing, but look at the bigger picture, and I think that they doubt the U.S. commitment to actually deterring the Iranian regime from being aggressive against them.
Indeed.
We used to talk about Steve Austin, the $6 million man. Now, regardless of the fact that Lloyd Austin is the Secretary of Defense, the prisoner release made him the $6 billion man or so because of the unfrozen assets.
Well, unfortunately, there remains much to be done and to be said on this issue, and hopefully smarter minds will prevail in the future. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Mark Kimmitt, Colonel Joel Rayburn, and Mr. Owen for being part of today's panel. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well from here in Jerusalem. Until next time, Shalom. Israel has launched operations
on Vladimir Putin.
helping Iran develop. We have logic, we have rationale, we understand how the system operates. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.